morning. This is Talking Animals on WMNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. And before we go any further, I want to thank all those who pledged in support of Talking Animals as part of the WMNF Winter Fund Drive that ended just earlier this morning. We received rousing support, ultimately reaching our towering goal. Still, if you'd like to support WMNF, you didn't have a chance to donate or would like to donate again, please go to WMNF.org and do so. Thank you again for all the support. Meanwhile, my guest today is Dr. Alex Travis, Director of Cornell Public Health and Chair of the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health in the Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine. In this Talking Animals conversation, Dr. Travis will discuss bird flu from a broad perspective, largely pegged to the Avian Flu Resource Center, an online portal that Cornell University recently launched. New information and warnings about the current strain of bird flu, also known as highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI, are often dogged. They surface rapidly and frequently online, stretching from government websites to social media platforms. Unfortunately, these stories and postings are often dogged by rumors and misinformation. The scenario and its problematic implications spurred Cornell to create, as noted in a recent press release, quote, a comprehensive resource that offers a one-stop clearinghouse for the most current and trustworthy information on bird flu, unquote. And that's the Avian Flu Resource Center. The Resource Center seeks to provide reliable information to a wide swath of users, including the general public, farmers, wildlife professionals, state and public health agency partners, and veterinarians. We'll hear more about bird flu and the Avian Flu Resource Center when I speak with Dr. Alex Travis in just a moment here on Talking Animals on WMNF. Coming up later in today's program, I'll talk with Kathleen Carroll Mason, who will be teaching Guided by Animal Angels, 3 Steps to Find Peace After Animal Loss, an online course with no registration fee that Mason is offering on March 12th. Most of us have lost an animal or sadly will lose one, and this session is designed to help attendees better understand and cope with that kind of loss. We'll hear more about this Guided by Animals session, Animal Angels session, and a bit later in the program here on Talking Animals on WMNF. Right now, though, let's talk bird flu and a new resource for current and accurate information about bird flu with Dr. Travis, with a reminder that I invite you to join the conversation by calling 813-239-9663, emailing DJ at WMNF.org, or texting 813-433-0885. Let's welcome Dr. Alex Travis to Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, Dr. Travis.
Good morning, Duncan. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks so much for joining us on Talking Animals.
Wonderful to be here.
So, hoping, chiefly, of course, to help us understand bird flu amidst the steady stream of rumors and misinformation and many puzzling items that are supposed to pass for news. But first, so we have a bit more context and understanding about you, Dr. Travis. I'm not sure I'm bright enough to understand exactly what your job titles mean. Maybe you can. I can ask you to explain a bit about your roles at Cornell and how you carry them out.
Yeah, no worries. I am a bit confusing, actually.
Okay.
So I am both a veterinarian and a research scientist. I have a PhD, actually, in the cell and molecular biology of reproduction. I used to do private practice during my scientific training. So for about 6 years, I did some private veterinary practice in both dogs and cats, and about 50% exotic. But I then switched gears to work at Cornell University as a faculty member. And so for about the past 23 years, I've done research in the lab and then started to develop programs. And one of the things that people often don't realize is veterinary medicine is a really key part of the public health system. And so I was picked to actually lead the start of a new public health program at Cornell University, which is almost, I think it's rare. I think there's 2 that are actually housed in colleges of veterinary medicine across the country.
And so, Dr. Travis, is that program that you say, which sounds like pretty singular, designed to sort of more formally bridge the two? It sounds like that they're not as commonly thought of in the same way that they maybe should be in terms of veterinary medicine.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Human public health, we know, is critically dependent upon the health of the environment in many different ways. And so all of our students, so we administer training leads to the professional public health degree, the Master of Public Health degree. And so those people come out trained to work on chronic disease, obesity, smoking, diabetes, all those things that you think about with public health. But all of our students also get trained with a One Health systems approach that focuses on these links between human, animal, and environmental health. So that is something special about our program.
Yeah, and it sounds like particularly timely, given the conversation we're going to have, just when I would think that bird flu would draw on each of those disciplines in the way that they're sort of pulled together in that program.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. We started the program recognizing that many of the most pressing challenges that human health faces boil down to like two big issues. One is the unsustainable ways we interact with the environment, and then obviously the inequitable ways we bear burdens and interact with each other across society. And so we had that realization after, the first SARS came out in the early 2000s, and of course before that, many other diseases, Ebola virus, HIV. About 70% of emerging infectious diseases come into people from non-human animals. And so that's one really, really big connection.
Yeah.
That's important in public health.
And do most people find that kind of statistic jarring?
I think it is surprising for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And because a lot of times I get asked, well, why is Cornell's public health program administered at vet college?
Yeah.
And I point back to the very first person who got a veterinary degree in North America, actually got it at Cornell. It was a guy named Daniel Salmon. And you might kind of recognize his name because salmonella is named after him.
Oh, wow.
And so this historic connection of veterinary medicine and human health, public health, goes back to the very beginning. And so our food system, the safety of our food system, these infectious disease issues. And now we see all these other issues with biodiversity loss of wildlife, and how those impact our health with emergence of new diseases, things like that.
Yeah, so they really do intersect in ways that most of us probably wouldn't have occasion to ponder, but the connection is strong.
Yeah, and now with this highly pathogenic avian influenza, following kind of hot on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, that's two examples right on top of each other.
Yeah. Well, since that's kind of chiefly what we're here to discuss, let's get into that, and let's start and maybe stay mostly, for better or worse, on the kind of fundamental level. But what is, especially the current one in particular, what is bird flu exactly? What are we talking about when we're talking about bird flu? Yeah,
so bird flu is like a giant term because there's lots of different kinds of influenza viruses that affect birds. And most of them are what we would call low pathogenicity avian influenza, which means that they're there a lot and they usually don't cause severe illness in birds. And these are circulating all the time, particularly in waterfowl, things like ducks, geese, seagulls, for example. And even when they get into poultry, cause some illness, maybe decreased egg production, but don't kill the birds. Highly pathogenic avian influenza is a different thing entirely. And when that gets into poultry, it can kill up to 100% of the birds very, very, very quickly.
So that's the factor, because it sounds like, from what little I've seen, and partly using your great resource center that we're here as well to discuss, that avian influenza, does, as you noted, exist in the wild and occurs kind of naturally in certain, wild aquatic birds. You mentioned ducks and I guess geese and seagulls and others. So that sounds like a fairly sedate scenario, and then all of a sudden there's one or more elements that seem to amp that up to this sort of dramatic, menacing condition that we're currently find ourselves experiencing. So is that kind of what the catalyst is then to shift those things so dramatically?
Yeah, and so those changes occur in a couple different ways. And so, just like in people, we have influenza viruses, and this year is actually a bad year for human seasonal flu. And so there's forms that spread around, and those change gradually by mutation, little changes all the time. And that's why we need new vaccines, updated vaccines on seasonal flu. But then influenza viruses can also do this other thing where if one individual, whether it's a person, a bird, a pig, gets infected with multiple different kinds of flu at once, then if they're inside the same cell, they can actually swap genetic material.
Wow.
And that's called reassortment. And that can lead to suddenly the emergence of a new virus that has very different characteristics because it's taking bits and pieces of, say, two different strains.
Wow, that sounds scary, just even as you calmly describe it, just in terms of what the implications are.
Yeah, and so the current outbreak of the highly pathogenic avian influenza, that had been circulating around Asia and Europe for a couple years, and our wildlife folks were watching it. And it was, in some ways a matter of time, perhaps, before it came in. And then it did come into North America in November of 2021.
And how was that introduced here, Dr. Travis?
Yeah, so it came across the Atlantic. So either a bird traveled to like Iceland or Greenland and passed it to another bird, and then that bird came over all the way here, or a bird just came all the way across. We don't know exactly, but genetically, the evidence suggests that it did come across that route. But then once it came in North America, it spread very rapidly through both through wild birds, and then it got into poultry, and that caused massive amounts of loss in the poultry industry, which is still ongoing.
So let me make sure I'm tracking you here. So when this kind of new form or new virus emerges, is it that and or the species that it's affecting that determines how dark the outcome is? In other words, sounds like once this particular virus hit poultry, the poultry didn't stand a chance, and again, I guess then that's where the decisions led to euthanize just massive amounts of these birds.
Yeah, it's over. I think the latest tally is over 166 million birds, and there was just a very some egg layer facilities in Ohio just very, very recently. One of them had like 3 million birds in it. And again, I mean, when it gets into poultry, it can kill up to 100% of the birds very, very quickly.
Is it also considered highly contagious as well? Is that why they move so swiftly, or just the fact that the birds, once it's in that flock or that area, the inevitable is going to quickly happen?
Yeah, the U.S. agricultural industry, the USDA, work extremely hard to try to prevent any spread of it because you certainly don't want to transmit it from farm to farm. And so the poultry facilities are what's called barrier facilities they try to have very good security, biosecurity, to prevent that kind of thing from happening. But really, because it's so bad, there are these, very kind of strict controls to try to prevent it from spreading. What's interesting about the current outbreak is that in many prior cases when these things emerge, they kind of burn themselves out, 3-6 months or so, and then that, variant or strain of the virus disappears. This outbreak has lasted now since November 2021. And like you said about transmission between bird species, it's also done something interesting, which is that it's gotten into mammals. And so a lot of different wildlife species, from bobcats to bears and mink and all sorts of even rodents have gotten it. And more recently, it's gotten into dairy cattle.
Wow. So I guess one of my questions along those lines is, Dr. Travis, is once a different species contracts it, like just drawing a parallel for now, at least I may come back to this. Like in humans, if somebody catches the flu, they feel awful for X amount of days, but then they get better and they shake it and they're kind of on with their their life and their normal routine. As these other species contract this one, can they shake it or not? I mean, obviously we know the birds are that fate is pretty much prescribed. But if some of these other mammals catch it, is there a chance for them to shake it, or are they too doomed as well?
Yeah. So, all right. So let me really be clear about the human risk. So right now, the risk to people is low. There's no evidence of human-to-human transmission of this virus. There have been 70 cases of it, and one person did die from this. Most all of the cases in people have been linked to either farm workers or veterinarians or people involved in the poultry industry or dairy industry. There have been just a handful of cases where it's not clear how people were exposed. So compared to seasonal flu, yes, I mean, for the most part, most people get it and get better. As I mentioned before, though, this flu season has been really, really bad.
Yeah.
There have been 33, I think, million people sick with the flu in the U.S. this year, and that's 430,000 have been hospitalized and 19,000 died.
Wow.
So, again, out of 33 million, most people get better, but 19,000 died. So seasonal flu is having a huge impact on us, and that is one of the risks. Again, these influenza viruses have the ability to mix their genetic material. And so that is one of the reasons why this is getting attention. Because even though the number of cases in people is so low, what people are on the lookout for is, well, what about if a person gets exposed to this new avian influenza, this bad form of it, and at the same time they've got one of the seasonal viruses, right?
Yeah, it's that combination again, which is the pivotal.
Right, and then they mix.
Yeah.
And so, and the same thing can happen in other species. And so, some species are affected worse than others. Domestic cats, for example, can get very, very, very sick and die from it. They seem to be having a very tough time with this. Most of the exposures of domestic cats are related to, farm cats. And actually, when it first went into dairy cattle a year ago, one of the ways they knew something was amiss was not only was the milk spoiled, it was obviously the milk was different, but cats were dying on those farms. So domestic cats can get it, and when they do, they get bad respiratory signs, some upper respiratory sneezing, kinds of things you would expect with flu. But they can also get very bad neurological signs. And unfortunately, they seem to be having a very difficult time with it. They often don't get better when they get the case.
So, sorry, Dr. Travis, I'm just going to follow up on that for one sec on the cats. So the cats, largely the ones that have gotten it because they are on farms where it's present otherwise, and so they're inhaling it. Is that how the cats are contracting it, or are they getting it through other means as well?
Yeah, so mixed ways. And one of the ways, in addition to being on farms, cats can also get the virus, and there's evidence of this, from eating raw foods that are contaminated with the virus. Mm-hmm. And so raw milk, on a dairy farm, they might get access to drinking raw milk. And we know that when a cow is affected, there are massive amounts of the virus actually in the milk. And so pasteurization, the good news is pasteurization has been shown to be completely effective. There's no risk to your cat or to human health from a pasteurized or a cooked food product. But raw milk products like cheeses and yogurts can definitely, and raw foods, even raw foods that you might buy commercially at the store, can and have gotten cats sick. Wow.
Well, that's scary for sure, and it sounds like people have to be very, very vigilant about what their cats, if they're whether they're on their farms, especially, that'd be tricky. But even just regularly, based on what you described about other sources, you have to be really.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
So it's farms. Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt, but it's farms, but also backyard flocks. More and more people these days have backyard birds, and I know your viewers are in Florida, and there have been several cases, 2 backyard flocks in the past month in Florida. So there's also, and there's wild birds, and so there's a fear with outdoor cats if they eat. If a bird gets sick and lands on the ground and a cat gets it, can they get it that way?
Yeah.
And so that's a risk as well. So if people, the guidance for human health is try not to come into contact with any sick or odd behaving wildlife. Call in New York, it's the Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm not sure what the office's name is in Florida, but they can advise you. If you have children, if you have pets and that are going to come into contact with dead animals, then use gloves, a face mask, glasses, pick it up with a shovel, put the animal in like a double or triple bag and put it in an outdoor trash receptacle.
Wow, so you got to be extremely careful, and it sounds like it's just so easily transmitted if you're anything less than that careful.
Yeah, so again, the risk to people, I don't want to overstate that. The risk to people at this point is still low, and but we don't know, and I'm sorry, your question was how is it transmitted to cats? They can get it from eating contaminated products. It's also materials that are contaminated with the virus in other ways. When birds shed the virus, it's not just upper respiratory and neurological signs. They can also have GI signs, so like diarrhea. So fecal material can also potentially be a way of transmitting it. So any kind of contaminated material, clothing, your boots, anything that has bird poop on it could also be a source of transmission.
Wow. Okay, that's really good to know. Let me reintroduce you for folks who might just have tuned in subsequently. This is Talking Animals on WMNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. If you did just tune in, my guest is Dr. Alex Travis, Director of Cornell Public Health and Chair of the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health in the Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine. We're discussing bird flu and the Avian Flu Resource Center, an online resource that Cornell recently launched, aiming to provide current and accurate information about bird flu. If you have a question for Dr. Travis about bird flu, please call 813-239-9663. Email dj@wmnf.org or text 813-433-0885. So some questions have come in via email, Dr. Travis. So one says, for the expert, in your opinion, is the USDA policy to kill all the hens for one sick one in the building an overreaction? Is there another strategy that can save some of the hens?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. And that's a tough one. That is way above my pay grade. There are a lot of people working on vaccines and things, but it's not, and there have been some recent announcements of some vaccines moving forward in kind of getting approval processes, but it's not really, there's a lot of economics.
Yeah.
Because our ability as a country to export poultry products or egg products also can be impacted by these things. So this is super complicated.
Yeah.
And I can just reassure the questioner, no one as a veterinarian or a government official ever wants to kill an animal. But these measures have been put in place to try to protect the entire, agricultural system. And
contain the spread that might be, otherwise possible in a certain area or building or whatever, where there might be one nearby or adjacent where it would be very easy to then, infect a whole other group of, gigantic group of chickens. But you had touched on vaccines, and I was going to ask you something about that anyway. Because, again, to avoid contracting the flu, many humans get vaccinations. Can you speak to the efficacy and practicality of vaccinations in other species? Even as recently as today's morning edition on NPR, there was a piece reporting on how a vaccine could protect chickens that produce eggs, but the chicken farmers are opposed to this vaccine because the idea of having vaccine in the meat that they're selling is problematic. So that just seems inherently complicated from the get-go. But can you just talk about how that's coming along? Because it sounds like that might be an important tool to sort of combat this as we go further.
Yeah, and that's and again, that's a better for like a poultry expert or even an economist. But it's that is a big issue because many of the tests that people or countries or businesses use to see if something is contaminated rely on antibodies. And historically, those tests haven't been able to tell the difference between, well, is this a product, did this bird get exposed to the flu? Did it have the flu? Or was it vaccinated? Because the point of a vaccine is to get that individual animal or person to make antibodies, right?
Yeah.
And so if the test is looking for antibodies against it, then it's very difficult to say, well, was it sick or was it vaccinated? And that's at the heart of this difficulty.
Sounds like a tough terrain to navigate there.
It absolutely is, and those this is an example where there are incredibly difficult decisions that have to be made, and as things progress and there's advancements made in both the vaccines, but also in diagnostic tests, this might be something where the policy changes because both the science advances and also the economics change.
Yeah. So another one of our emailers says, one of the most insane aspects of the new Trump administration is the inexplicable Doge firings. I was curious if your guests would know what exactly were the roles of the bird flu scientists who were fired and then asked to come back. Were they data scientists?
To be honest, I don't know exactly what they did.
Okay.
I do know that, I did see I saw reports that and it was a relatively small number, but in most of these offices, there are only relatively small numbers of people that were working on this. And so that was definitely an oops, where this is not the time when we want to be reducing our ability to keep track of the spread of a virus.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a formidable foe. At best, it sounds like it's, from what you've already explained to us, so complicated and tricky and how it can spread and the ways it can cross species. I mean, it just seems like you'd want all your best scientists and researchers doing whatever they could to try to help explore this and come up with some solutions.
Absolutely. And so this is, new state governments, federal government agencies, whether it's departments of health. In New York State, we have a Department of Agriculture and Markets, Department of Environmental Conservation, the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Department of Health. All of these groups are talking to each other, and that's really, really important. And then they all interface with the federal agencies, the CDC, the USDA, on these really important issues that affect all species, right? Because even if the virus is just pretend for a minute that the virus was just in poultry and it couldn't affect mammals, that still can impact human health because you see changes in the price of eggs and poultry products. And those are really important for our health. And so these things affect human health in all sorts of different ways, both directly and indirectly through the economics.
Yeah, well, I was not surprised you're going to touch on eggs, and I still will in a moment. But I just thought, just kind of to back up a little bit for a more slightly broader view for a sec, can you talk to me about the genesis of the Avian Flu Resource Center? Who first proposed the idea, and how did the concept take hold and evolve?
Yeah, so that was unfortunately my idea.
Oh, okay. Well, it's funny. I had a hunch, even though I didn't see anything that said so.
Yeah.
But why do you say unfortunately? Just because it's a complicated world to be. Yeah.
But we have, I'm teasing a little bit. We have so many experts in these areas, right? We've got world experts in influenza in dairy cattle, in poultry, in wildlife, in domestic animals like dogs and cats. We've got researchers who are devising new diagnostic tests. We've got others who are working on how the virus, what mutations let it move from species to species, and then other people working on antiviral therapies and vaccines and things. And then, of course, all the practitioners, the veterinarians, and we've got one of the world's biggest diagnostic centers that's testing thousands and thousands and thousands of milk samples, and was part of the first detections of when it got into milk. So all these folks are busy working, and there was kind of like two ideas. One is we needed a place to pull all that together, right, so that we're all aware of what each other are doing.
Sure.
And then that the world also understands we also run a public health program. And so what are the connections between veterinary medicine and public health through this kind of like One Health thinking? And then we said, all right, well, also the federal government has these wonderful sites and maps where you can look to see, if you're in Florida, well, since the beginning of the outbreak, how many dairy herds were affected or how many poultry flocks were affected, and then how many in the past month. There's these wonderful resources, but we kind of wanted to create a kind of you can imagine it's like an upside down funnel, where people can go to one place and then get directed to, well, what are they interested in? Are they interested in wildlife? Are they interested in domestic cats? And then get them directed to the resources that are relevant for them.
And we should say that without going into the big long URL, you could just search for Avian Flu Resource Center, and you'll land on the on this great resource. And how does it work day to day? I mean, how many people are sort of working on it or updating it at any given point? Because it seems like, again, there's a wealth of information across multiple categories.
Yes. So we've got probably a core group of 3, 4, 5 people who are giving a lot of updates and we're still putting up the pieces of it. We're going to be coming up with a dashboard, that'll be presenting some of the cases, how many people have been affected and how many examples of, say, domestic cats, how many herds of dairy cattle, how many flocks in poultry, things like that. And then again, linking people to the updated maps. We also have some students in the public health students who are helping with this. But really, again, there's so many folks who are working every day on this topic. Yeah. And we're trying to, the smaller group is trying to direct the public to the amazing resources that they represent and the work they're doing and the practice they're doing, things like that. There's also links, I don't know how many veterinarians are in your audience, but there's also links there if people want to send in samples, whether they're cattle, milk samples, or cats, things like that, to the diagnostic lab. There's also links there to sort of
bolster the research side of it, kind of, in a way?
Well, but also just for practice. So,
oh, I see.
If you're a veterinarian who's interested in, I have this cat that, the owner has backyard poultry, and this cat has respiratory and neurologic signs. We wanted to make sure there's, information there that, there's evidence. There's risk, right? So should they wear personal protective equipment like a face mask and face shield, glasses, gloves, when they're interacting with that animal to make sure, that they're not going to be at risk potentially of getting it.
I see. Basic precautions that should be taken and things that they can provide to help widen out the source of information about this for the resource center and just generally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to update it frequently. There's some, news links on the bottom. I mean, there was just an article in People magazine the other day. One of our wildlife faculty was on NBC News a few days ago, last week. A really nice little segment. So there's some links to like some popular press.
Yeah.
But then, links to, and so different pieces of it are updated as needed, kind of, but pretty much something gets updated almost every day, it would seem. And then, because it is a fast-moving situation.
Right, and it seems like part of the very premise of it is to try to stay ahead of the information and avert the misinformation that seems to pop up because everything is moving so fast. So I would think the people working on the resource center necessarily have to kind of work fast just to kind of stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. And so like I know, for example, I'll tell you, like our poultry page needs to get updated today because of the recent big changes in the outbreak in Ohio and things. So there's a need for constant updating.
For sure. Again, this is Talking Animals on WMNF. I'm Duncan Strauss. My guest is Dr. Alex Travis, Director of Cornell Public Health and Chair of the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health at Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine. We've been discussing bird flu and the Avian Flu Resource Center, an online resource that Cornell recently launched, all about bird flu. So we're in our final moments of chatting, but you're welcome to join the conversation by calling 813-239-9663, emailing dj@wmnf.org, or texting 813-433-0885. So everyone's talking about eggs. We even did briefly, but I want to just circle back to it. What should we know about eggs from a bird flu perspective?
So the eggs you buy and the milk you buy at the store, there is absolutely no evidence that if you cook your eggs, if you have pasteurized milk, there is no evidence that those can hurt you.
Yeah.
So you're safe to eat. Continue eating eggs. Continue drinking pasteurized milk. The FDA says or calls consumption of any raw food diet, raw milk, as a high, I think they call it a high risk choice, and I think that is a good way to describe it because we have evidence in, unfortunately, a lot of evidence in domestic cats that when they consume those raw milk and raw food diets, they can die.
Yeah, geez. And kind of on a somewhat related note, I think this was a few days ago in the New York Times. There was talking about eggs and like breakfast. Now, some people like with breakfast sandwiches are just generally they like so-called runny eggs, and just saying, right now that's probably not the best idea, just because, if you don't fully cook your eggs, you may or may not be inviting some kind of additional risk that you could avoid by fully cooking them.
And yes, so food safety, basic food safety. So this is funny because in my house, I've always liked my eggs kind of well done.
Okay.
And others like them wetter. And just from a food safety perspective, I am always the one who's like, let's make sure we cook those all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're in our final moment here, but Dr. Travis, I want to ask, since we've talked about cats a few times, obviously they can get it and have gotten it, unfortunately, but if I understand this correctly, dogs typically do not.
That right now, there's evidence that some wild canids can absolutely get it, so foxes and things like that, but domestic dogs there's other kinds of influenza that domestic dogs can get. And but this, so far, and I'm knocking on wood, you can't see it, but so far that doesn't seem to be happening, or at least there's not evidence of it yet.
Okay, well, that's so far so good. Again, it's such a rapidly changing phenomenon that it's hard to know, but at least compared to cats, which we know for sure there's been an issue, dogs so far have been kind of clear of that. And one last question among those that came in by email. What happened to the culled birds? This email is
and how they're disposed of?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Oh, I honestly, I would have to look up the government. I'm sure that's available online somewhere, but I off the top of my head, those have to be disposed of in a way that...
wouldn't pose any risk, right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they're not going to go into any kind of food system.
Right. Or disposed anywhere where somehow it could be, spread or reached. Yeah. All right, Dr. Travis. Well, we have kind of just about reached the end of our time. We were speaking with Dr. Alex Travis, again from Cornell Public Health and chair of the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health, Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine, and the Resource Center. You can just search for Avian Flu Resource Center at Cornell, and it pops right up, and it's a great thing. And as we said, there's all kinds of sections, and it's ever-changing and ever-updated, and it's a great way to stay current on what's happening with bird flu and avoid some of the misinformation that unfortunately seems to be quite commonly found. So thank you again, Dr. Travis, for joining us on Talking Animals. Thanks for your great work and the Resource Center and making time to join us today to talk about it.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been my pleasure.
Great. Thanks again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. In a moment, I'll speak with Kathleen Carroll Mason about the Guided by Animal Angels 3 Steps to Find Peace After Animal Loss online class she'll be teaching on March 12th. More details on that class in just a moment. Right now, though, we're going to step into the Comedy Corner with the wry and wonderful Dusty Slay with a piece called Trailer Park Pets. Today's Comedy Corner on Talking Animals on WMNF.
I feel like parents are a lot different today than they were when I was growing up, like especially when it comes to pets, right? Because nowadays you might hear some parent be like, we got to take our cat to the vet. Right? But when I was growing up, my dad would be like, we don't have a cat anymore. And then we didn't, He couldn't even get mad about it. I'd just be like, well, I hope we get another one. He's like, well, we'll see what wanders up. Because we didn't have real pets. We just had prisoners of nature. Like a dog would wander up, we'd chain him to a tree. Now he's ours. That's why we didn't believe in the Easter Bunny, right? We knew if a bunny came to our house, we'd lock him up. Lock him up. We had the meanest cat you ever seen for about 2 weeks. Found out it was a possum, and... Possums are scary. I don't know if you've seen them before. If I see a possum in my backyard, I just go inside. I don't come out for 2 weeks. Can't do it. Can't do it. You ever go to somebody's house and they got a dog that's barking at you, growling at you, and they go, oh, he won't bite. It's like, why do you think that? Because he's never done it before? Well, maybe today is the day. Because he looks like he wants to bite. They always go, well, he might lick you to death. I'm like, death? Who said anything about dying? I'm just worried about being bitten. I don't even know why you brought up death.
That was Dusty Slay in today's Comedy Corner with a piece called Trailer Park Pets, taken from his album Son of a Ditch. Now it's time to talk with Kathleen Carroll Mason about the online class called Guided by Animal Angels, 3 Steps to Find Peace After Animal Loss that she's offering on March 12th. Here's Kathleen Carroll Mason on Talking Animals on WMNF. Good morning, Kathleen.
Good morning, Duncan. How are you?
I'm really well. Thanks for joining us on Talking Animals this morning.
Yes, it's great to be here.
Great. So before we get into the details of the upcoming class, talk a little bit, if you would, about your own background in terms of animals and counseling and things that might hook into the class itself.
Yeah, so animals have been a big part of my life. When I was even a baby, my dad would say he'd come home from work with a bag of diapers under one arm and a bag of dog food under the other. And so I've always had animals, and about 20 years ago, I got into healing work, mind-body wellness. I started working with people around deep healing and getting unstuck and on track in their life. And that's how I began. And then I went through my own losses along the way around animals. And I went through a painful divorce, for example, where I had to rehome my horses. I thought I found a great home for one of them. Then I found out she had broken her leg and passed away. And
Oh, geez.
so I understand, yes, it was very painful. So on top of the divorce, and then you feel guilt, around animal loss. I find that people, they feel a gaping hole in their heart from the loss of animals. And at certain times of the day, such as when it's time to feed them, they really notice their absence, and they may think about getting another one, and but they know it won't be the same. So they have a lot of guilt around it. But how I got into animal communication and combining that into healing work is during COVID. I started working with animals and doing animal healing work, and I met Happy Feet, a paint horse with laminitis, who was at a rescue, and I adopted him, and he's in the photo on my banner for this class. And so I combined animal communication with healing work, and I started doing it online. And I found that people wanted to help their animals, but the animals wanted to help the people.
There you go. Well, that's a good relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in your observations, what are some ways the people don't help themselves that much in handling an animal loss that you're kind of going to help guide them to, be more effective or help themselves more and feel better self-care?
Yeah, I mean, they keep beating themselves up with guilt and remorse. They have a hard time letting go of that. It's different than human loss. We don't generally euthanize humans, but we sometimes, feel the need to euthanize animals, and then we can really beat ourselves up and struggle with peace of mind. And it was like this one horse that had passed, the message I got from it when I was working with a woman who had really doted and groomed this horse. The horse said, "Are you taking care of yourself as well as you took care of me?" So, we need to do some healing around that and helping ourselves more.
Yeah, and I read something about the course that you acted that guided by Animal Angels was aimed at women. Is it exclusively for women?
It doesn't have to be. No, I just seem to happen to work with a lot of women in this area. But
I see. But anybody that's interested in taking that or enrolling in the online class is welcome to do so, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. It's called Guided by Animal Angels, 3 Steps to Find Peace After Animal Loss.
And can you sort of briefly address how, in your view, animal loss is notably different from other kinds?
Yes, well, like I was saying, the euthanasia is such a big part. And of course, animals people generally don't know what animals are thinking. They might get an idea or feeling, and they may have, been suffering or struggling with some type of disease, and the person didn't realize it until it was too late. So that lack of communication and, the way we sometimes have to handle, euthanasia and various other things are just different from human loss. It can be much harder to deal with. And our animals are such a source of healing and therapy and unconditional love for many people who, are having stress in their life, which many of us are.
For sure. Yeah. Well, can you give us any kind of a sneak preview of what the 3 steps that are noted in the title of the course, what those 3 steps are?
Well, I do a little, part of it is the difference between the two, but I also get into a little visualizing around, because that's where we really go deep for healing. I started out in clinical hypnotherapy years ago, so I also use meditation techniques. So we're going to do a little bit of, visualization, meditation there, relaxing a little bit. And hopefully people will feel better as well at the end.
Yeah. And how do folks who might be interested in signing up for the class, how do they register for the course?
The simplest way is to go to the website, which is clearlyblissful.com.
Okay.
So, clearlyblissful.com, and at the top there's a banner where they can click on it and sign up.
And again, there's no ticket. It's
No.
You're welcome to just join if you.
It's absolutely free. I'm not actually selling anything, so.
That's great. How many attendees do you anticipate? I assume you've probably done this previously.
It's hard to say. Sometimes, it fluctuates because I do events here and there, and I'm not sure yet. A lot of people sign up at the last minute, but it is interactive, so people do get to ask questions as well.
That's great. Well, that sounds good, and it's coming up on March 12th. And again, go to clearlyblissful.com to find out more and to register if you're interested in participating. So, Kathleen, thanks for joining us on Talking Animals. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
You bet.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Coming up on WNF, it's The Conversation, the show hosted by Nunez and Joaquin Carter. After that, we shift back to music programming with Jim and Bannon holding forth from 1 to 3, followed by today Randy Wynn in for Nancy C., hosting the Wednesday Traffic Jam from 3 to 6 p.m., at which point our terrific Wednesday night block of Latin music kicks in. Meanwhile, on this show, at the moment, as a prize for Name That Animal Tune, we'll be offering something fabulous from the Talking Animal Vault. You never know, but it's some cool trinket, I'm sure. And the first person who calls 813-239-9663 and correctly identifies this animal song, it's Name That Animal Tune on Talking Animals on WMNF. We have just about reached into today's edition of Talking Animals on WMNF. Next Wednesday, I'll be joined by Glenn Hatchell for another edition of Ask the Trainer, in which Glenn, a behaviorist and dog trainer and a former programmer here, of course, at WMNF, answers listeners' questions about their dogs or their cats, behavior, other animals, too, are always welcome to get in on this. It's always a wonderful program in which we all learn new things about our animals and their behavior and how to improve things in that regard. So that's next Wednesday here on Talking Animals on WNF. Also invite you to visit talkinganimals.net for audio archives of every show we've ever broadcast. Apple Podcasts are available too, as well as on other podcast platforms. Also links to our social media pages, etc. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter to find out a bit about our guests a couple of days beforehand and other news from the Talking Animals world. I'm Duncan Strauss. Thanks very much for listening. Have a good week. Be kind to animals. Be kind to others. Be kind to yourself. This is Talking Animals on WNF Tampa, Brandon, Clearwater, Largo, Weeki Wachee, and beyond. And again, still a chance to donate. Go online to WNF.org if you didn't get a chance to donate in their Winter Fund Drive. Or if you just want to donate again, we're all for that too. So we'll see you next week here on Talking Animals on WMNF. Stay tuned for The Conversation coming up next after NPR News headlines. Thanks so much.